63 wasn't supposed to feel like this. Isla Merrin sat on her front porch in the early chill of a Devon morning, wrapped in a worn cardigan, her mug of black tea cooling untouched beside her. The mist rolled lazily over the sloping fields behind her cottage, swallowing the stone walls and the apple trees she hadn't pruned in years. It was a postcard view, beautiful but hollow. Her only son, Ewan, hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. She didn't know exactly when the silence had become permanent, sometime after his marriage to Leona, a bright young botanist from Exeter. There had been a fight over money, then another about boundaries, and then, finally, nothing. Her calls stopped being returned. Birthdays came and went, so when she opened the door that morning and saw the parcel, a white box tied with a gold ribbon, her breath caught. The handwriting on the tag was unmistakable. "Happy birthday, Mum. Let's start over. Ewan." Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside were 12 cookies, perfect little rounds, glazed in pastel colors, decorated with delicate sugar flowers and gold leaf. They smelled faintly of almond and rose water, just like the ones she used to make when he was small. She sat there for a long time, staring at them, her heart caught between relief and suspicion. He'd remembered. He'd finally remembered. But why now? That evening she called Ruth Fenner, her neighbor and longtime friend. Ruth had known Ewan since he was a boy. She'd babysat him, fed him Sunday dinners when Isla worked late at the care home. "Go on then, love," Ruth laughed over the phone. "Eat one before they go stale." "He's reaching out, isn't he?" But Isla hesitated. Something in her gut whispered otherwise. Maybe it was the suddenness of it, or maybe it was guilt, the memory of harsh words they'd exchanged before the silence fell. Instead, she wrapped the cookies in a tin and brought them over to Ruth's that evening. "Take most of them," she said. "You've got the grandkids over tomorrow." "I'll keep one, just in case Ewan asks about them." Ruth grinned, not reading the unease in Isla's eyes. "You'll regret sharing if they're that good." The next morning, the phone rang before sunrise. "Isla?" It was Ruth's daughter, panic in her voice. "Mum's been rushed to hospital. She collapsed last night after supper. They think it's poisoning. She's barely breathing." The room spun. Isla nearly dropped the phone. Poisoning? By lunch, Ruth was in intensive care. Doctors were baffled. Severe convulsions, arrhythmia, sudden paralysis. Foodborne toxins, they said. Possibly something she'd eaten. Isla's eyes darted to her fridge. The single cookie she'd saved sat untouched on the middle shelf, wrapped carefully in cling film. She couldn't breathe. By evening, the phone rang again. "Mother," Ewan's voice, colder than she remembered. "I heard about Ruth," he said. "You didn't eat the cookies, did you?" "No," she whispered. I gave most of them to Ruth. She loves sweets, and There was silence. Then his tone shifted, sharp and hostile. "They weren't for her. They were for you." The line went dead. That night, Isla didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, trembling, replaying his words over and over. "They were for you." At dawn, she took out the bin from the previous day to carry it to the curb, and froze. At the bottom, half hidden beneath old envelopes, was a small brown bottle. Its label was half peeled off, but she could still read the faded letters. Aconitum napellus, extract. Her breath caught. Monk's hood, wolf's bane. She remembered it from one of Leona's lectures years ago. Highly toxic, used historically for poison-tipped arrows. What was it doing in her rubbish? She didn't go to the police right away. Not yet. Instead, she called Martin Kay, an old friend who worked as a lab technician at the local university. She told him she needed a favor and brought the cookie in a sealed plastic bag. When Martin called her back 2 days later, his voice was grim. "It's aconitum, Isla." Concentrated, enough to kill a grown adult in minutes. Her stomach dropped. He paused. "You need to go to the police." Now, but Isla wasn't ready to hand her son over. Not yet. She needed to know. She needed to hear it from his mouth. 2 days later, she drove to Ewan's cottage in Ashcombe, a quiet village surrounded by woods and narrow country roads. The house was modern and neat, full of Leona's plants and polished surfaces. Ewan answered the door looking startled, thinner than she remembered, dark circles under his eyes. "Did you come to accuse me or to make amends?" he asked. "Neither," she said softly. "I came to talk." She'd hidden her phone in her coat pocket, already recording. They made small talk for 10 minutes, awkward, brittle. Then she mentioned the cookies, her voice careful. "They were beautiful," she said. "The roses on top looked hand-painted. How did you manage the detail?" Ewan smiled faintly, pride flashing before he caught himself. "It's the powdered acon—" He froze mid-word, the color draining from his face. Her pulse hammered. She noticed, over his shoulder, another small brown bottle on the counter beside the herbs, identical to the one she'd found. She stood slowly. "I think I've heard enough." His expression shifted from guilt to fury. "You went through my things?" "Only the ones you tried to bury me with," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked out, calm, controlled, the recording safe in her pocket. That night, Detective Inspector Rowena Hale arrived at her door after Martin forwarded the lab results. Isla handed over the recording, the poison bottle, and the test report. By dawn, Ewan Merrin was under arrest for attempted murder. Leona later told police he'd been posting under fake names on herbalist forums, experimenting with toxic plants for research. Ruth survived, though barely, her recovery slow, her trust in humanity shaken. But Isla's revenge wasn't in the arrest. It was in what came after, what she planned next. The sound of rain was all that kept Isla company now. It pattered gently against the windows of her cottage, soft enough to seem almost kind. Outside, the mist rolled over the hedgerows of Ashcombe Vale, muffling the world in its pale, uncertain silence. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of bleach. The police had finished with the place 2 days ago, dusting, photographing, bagging the bottle she'd found in her bin. They had thanked her for her cooperation, told her she'd done the right thing, and left her in a house that no longer felt like her own. Ewan's arrest had been quiet but brutal. 2 patrol cars, 1 unmarked sedan, and a flurry of neighbors pretending not to look. Leona had stood on the porch as they took him away, crying into her sleeves. She'd refused to believe it at first, swore he'd never hurt anyone. But when the evidence came, when Isla's recording hit her inbox via Detective Hale's team, the disbelief shattered. "Now," the village whispered. The son who'd tried to poison his mother, the botanist gone mad, the woman who'd lived to tell the tale. Isla had spent her whole life craving quiet. Now she had it, and it was unbearable. The first call came from Detective Hale. "Mrs. Merrin," the detective said, her voice steady but tired. "The Crown Prosecution Service has approved charges. Attempted murder. Possession of a controlled poison, reckless endangerment. He's being held without bail for now. Without bail," Isla repeated softly, tasting the words. "Yes. And Mrs. Merrin," Hale paused, "if you need victim services or relocation, we can arrange that." "Relocation?" Isla almost laughed. "I've lived here 40 years, Inspector." "I'm not the one who needs moving." Hale hesitated, perhaps sensing something under the calm. "All right," she said finally, "but be careful. You've already done more than enough." After she hung up, Isla stared out the window for a long time, her tea gone cold again. She wasn't satisfied, not even close. Her son would be prosecuted, yes, but Ewan was clever. He knew how to twist things, to manipulate sympathy. She'd seen him do it to Leona, to teachers, to colleagues. He'd paint himself as misunderstood, depressed, maybe even delusional, and people would believe him. Number. He deserved to lose something more permanent than freedom. He needed to lose himself. A week later, Isla received a letter. Not from Ewan, but from his solicitor. A polite, sterile note asking if she'd consider revising her testimony to reflect Ewan's mental health condition. There it was, the start of the performance. She folded the letter once, twice, slid it neatly into the fireplace, and struck a match. The flame licked across the paper like a sigh of relief. You always thought words could save you, she murmured. Let's see how silence destroys you instead. In the days that followed, Isla began to plan, not wildly, not vengefully, but with quiet precision. She visited Leona under the guise of concern, bringing soup and gentle conversation. Leona looked exhausted, hair unwashed, eyes rimmed red, her hands trembling every time she poured tea. The house that had once smelled of herbs now stank faintly of bleach and fear. "I don't understand it," Leona whispered. "He used to talk about healing plants, about helping people. Then he started growing those monk's hoods in the shed, said he was studying alkaloid toxicity. I thought it was just curiosity." "Curiosity," Isla said softly, "has killed more than cats." Leona gave a weak laugh that turned into a sob. "He said you'd forgiven him. That you asked for the cookies. He said it was a misunderstanding." Isla set her cup down carefully. "Leona, did he ever mention experiments before this?" Leona hesitated. "He kept a private blog, under the name Hollow Root, something about herbal alchemy. I didn't think it mattered. Should I give it to the police?" "Not yet," Isla said gently. "Send it to me first." Leona blinked. "Why?" "Because the police will see a crime. I want them to see a pattern." That night, Isla sat at her kitchen table reading through Ewan's old posts, dozens of entries, most banal, discussions of plants, recipes, tinctures, but some darker. "Dosage is everything," he'd written in one. "Nature offers both cure and curse. It's the hand that decides which." In another, "Forgiveness can be coaxed, but never trusted." She scrolled further, hands shaking. Pictures of his garden, rows of monkshood, foxglove, belladonna. Captions about toxicity levels, practical testing. There it was, the proof of obsession. But Isla wasn't content to merely hand it over. She added a few touches of her own, screenshots of fabricated messages where Ewan appeared to mock the police investigation, to gloat about control. She didn't lie entirely. She only gave his arrogance a louder voice. Then she printed the entire file, sealed it in a brown envelope, and mailed it anonymously to Detective Hale's office. A week later, the news broke. Toxic botanist blog revealed new evidence in attempted murder trial. The tabloids had a field day. Pictures of Ewan in handcuffs flooded the local news sites. His colleagues at the university disowned him, removing his research papers, denouncing his unethical experiments. Leona's name trended briefly on social media, then disappeared into silence, her reputation shredded by association. Isla didn't smile, but her heart steadied for the first time in months. Justice was moving, but it wasn't enough. She wanted him to know it was her, so she wrote a letter, not to send but to keep. Words crafted like glass shards, each one deliberate. "You tried to kill me with what you called forgiveness. I returned it to you as truth. You'll live long enough to watch your world collapse piece by piece, and you'll know your mother handed you the rope." She sealed it, placed it in a drawer beside the single poisoned cookie she'd kept. The cookie had darkened slightly, its sugar glaze turning dull. It looked almost harmless now. Almost. Months passed. Ewan's trial was scheduled for late summer. Isla attended every hearing, sitting quietly in the back, unnoticed. He looked thinner each time, his arrogance eroding. His lawyers spoke of mental decline, emotional instability, academic obsession. Ewan stared straight ahead, never meeting her eyes, until the final day of testimony. When she took the stand, her hands were steady. "Do you believe your son meant to kill you, Mrs. Merrin?" the prosecutor asked. She paused, then softly, "I believe he meant to teach me a lesson. He just didn't realize I already knew how to learn." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Ewan's face turned white. The verdict came quickly, guilty. The sentence, 20 years. Outside the courthouse, Detective Hale caught up to her. "You were remarkable in there," Hale said. "I don't think he expected you to be that composed." Isla smiled faintly. "He never did understand what strength looks like when it isn't loud." Hale nodded. "You got your justice." Isla didn't answer. Justice was too clean a word. What she'd done was quieter, messier, more honest. 2 nights later, she received a letter. From HMP Channing's Wood, Ewan's prison. "You destroyed me," it read. "You could have let them believe I was sick, but you wanted me humiliated. You've poisoned everything. I hope you're proud." Isla read it twice. Then she reached for her pen. "You did that yourself," she wrote back. "I just stopped pretending it was my fault." She sent it the next morning without hesitation. Autumn arrived early that year. The fields browned, the nights drew longer. Ruth recovered slowly, weak but walking again. Sometimes she came by with shortbread, always baked from scratch, always insisting Isla take the first bite. Life resumed its shape, but not its softness. One evening, Isla opened the drawer and took out the fireproof box. Inside lay the cookie and the letter. She studied them both, then set the letter aflame in the hearth, watching the edges curl into black lace. But the cookie she kept, her reminder, her trophy. In the right light, it almost glittered. And yet, even as she turned away from the fire, a strange peace settled over her. She hadn't screamed, hadn't lashed out. She had simply turned his poison back toward him, drip by drip, truth by truth. That was the thing about aconitum. It killed quickly in large doses, but given slowly, invisibly, it hollowed the heart long before it stilled it. She smiled faintly. Her son's heart was already gone. The frost came early that year. By the time October gave way to November, the hills around Ashcombe Vale had turned silver in the mornings, and the trees stood bare like old sentinels. Isla Merrin no longer feared the silence. She had come to know its texture, heavy at dawn, softer at dusk, always alive with what wasn't said. Her life had narrowed into small rituals. Tea at 6, walk at 7, feeding the robins that gathered on the stone wall by the gate, letters to no one that she never sent. The village had grown used to her again. Pity had cooled into respect, and respect into quiet distance. People waved, but rarely stopped. No one quite knew what to say to the woman whose son had tried to kill her, and whom she'd calmly watched destroy himself. She didn't mind. She preferred it that way. On the first Sunday of Advent, a letter arrived. HMP Channing's Wood, Ewan Merrin. Prisoner number 44,721. Isla almost threw it into the fire unopened, but something, maybe morbid curiosity, maybe unfinished business, made her pause. She slid it open with a paring knife. "Mother, I've been moved to the infirmary wing. They say the stress has been too much. I can't sleep. I keep seeing your face in the courtroom. I've been reading about aconitum again. You know it leaves nerve damage, even after recovery? Maybe that's what happened to me. Maybe it got into my blood before the police came. Some nights I wonder if you were poisoned too, all those years ago, just slower. You always looked at me like something inside you was dying. I'd like to see you before I'm transferred. Please. 1 hour. That's all I'm asking." It wasn't remorse. It was still about him. Always had been. She folded the letter carefully, slid it into the drawer beside the cookie, and stared at it for a long time. Then she made her decision. The prison was colder than she expected. Gray walls, steel doors, a smell of bleach and regret. She walked through security with the same calm she'd carried through the trial. No trembling, no hesitation. Ewan sat behind a pane of thick glass, thinner than ever, his once dark hair now streaked with gray. He looked more like a shadow of himself than the man she'd raised. He lifted the phone to his ear.